couldn't see what the beggar did next. I couldn't call for help because, a flea has no voice, and even if I could, what good would that do? I think what he did was he kissed my wife, or his wife now, I guess, and went on his way. I was there hanging onto his body, trying to figure out what to do, when all of a sudden it got really warm. It got warm because the beggar had walked into the kitchen to look for more food, I guess. As he walked into the kitchen, the cook looked up and he saw him and he said, "You again? I warned you." And he picked up his big knife. But the beggar said, "Wait a minute, good sir, wait a minute. I came here to play a game." And the cook said, "What kind of a game?" Instead of answering, the beggar reached into his cloak, pulled out the 2 bags of gold, and dumped them out on the table. And the cook looked at all that gold, and his eyes got really wide. And he reached out to take some of it. But the beggar said, "Wait a minute, good sir, wait a minute. Let's play a game. I'll bet that I can do something that you can't. I have here a little piece of straw. I bet that I can blow on that straw, but no matter how hard I blow, it won't blow away. If I win, I get the gold. If I lose, you get the gold." And the cook started to laugh. He said, "That little thing, you're going to blow it off the map." The beggar said, "Then we have a deal, don't we?" The cook said, "Yeah, sure." Here's what the beggar did. I'll move the camera a little bit so you can see what happened. He took that piece of straw and he put it on the table. And he took his 2 fingers and put it on a piece of straw like that. And he went, but no matter how hard he blew, of course it didn't go anywhere. He's holding it down. Of course the cook said, "That's it. Anybody can do that." The beggar said, "Can you do it?" The cook reached over with a big hand, stuck his 2 fingers down on that piece of straw, and he blew. But the straw didn't move. Do you know what did happen? What did happen was, as he blew, his fingers flew off. His fingers fell off his hand, and as he blew, they flew up into the air, and the beggar grabbed them and stuck them in his cloak. And of course the cook screamed because now he's missing 2 of his fingers. And he said, "Give me more fingers back, you!" But the beggar said, "Okay, we'll do it if we can play another game. I'll bet that I can wiggle one of my ears without wiggling the other. If I can do this, I get to keep your fingers. And if I can't do this, then you get your fingers back." Well, what are you going to say to that? The cook wanted his fingers back, so he agreed. And the beggar just reached up and he wiggled his ear without wiggling this one. And the cook said, "That's it. Anybody can do that." And the beggar said, "Can you?" The cook reached up to grab his ear, and he wiggled it, and as he wiggled it, it came off of his head, and he was there holding it in his hand. He dropped it. The beggar just reached up, grabbed the man's ear, and stuck it in his coat. Well, of course, by this, the cook was so mad he couldn't even talk. He ran over and he grabbed the beggar, at least as well as he could, because he was missing some fingers on his hand. And he grabbed him and he hauled him back off to the king. And he threw the beggar down in front of the king and demanded that the king do something about this. Just like what had happened to me. By the way, do you remember where I was? I was still a flea. I was still hanging on to the beggar. I was watching all this from his nose, waiting to see what would happen. When the cook was done screaming, the king looked down at the beggar and said, "Well, sir, who are you? And what do you do?" And the prince was there. The prince was just a little boy. He looked down at the beggar and he went, "He smells." Because he was just a little kid. Little kids don't know better than to say things like that. The beggar said, "I'm a beggar. It's my job to smell." Of course, everybody laughed at that. And the beggar said, "What I do is I collect things that nobody else has." The king said, "You collect things? Things like other men's fingers?" The beggar said, "I collect things like this." He reached back into his coat. How is he keeping all these things in his cloak, by the way? I have no idea. He reached into his cloak and he pulled out a ball. A big ball, but it was glowing. It was glowing big and bright and blue with light. And the prince said, "What is that? I want it." The beggar reached over to give the prince the little ball. And as the prince reached out his little hands for it, the beggar went like this. And he threw it up into the air. But it didn't come back down. It went up into the high ceiling, and it just stood there, hanging there. And the prince said, "What was that? Bring it back. I want it." But the beggar said, "I can't bring it back, but I can help you go get it." He reached into his coat once again and pulled out a rope. Maybe the same rope that he had put around my neck back when I was still a human. And he took that rope and he threw it up into the air. And the rope went up, till the top end was hanging in the air by the ball. And the bottom end was down here, down on the ground. And then the beggar did something really weird. I don't even know how to describe this. He took his hands and he put them in the middle of the rope and he pulled it apart. And now it wasn't a rope, it was a rope ladder. It was like two smaller ropes with a little bit of rope going up like a ladder. And the beggar said, "Young prince, if you want the ball, all you have to do is climb up this rope ladder and go get it." And the prince he ran up to that ladder and he started to climb. And he went up and up and up and up and up until he got to the really high part. And the people at the bottom, they're looking up at that high ladder and they said, "Wow, he's going really high up there. Hey, you can't even see him up there. He's up there so high." Wait a minute. It's not that you can't see him because he's so high. You can't see him because he's not there anymore. He's gone. Where did he go? Some people started to yell. Some people started looking around for the prince, but he wasn't there. The beggar just reached up, grabbed that rope ladder, and he yanked it down, and it fell down, but there was no prince on it. The prince was gone. The queen started to cry. And the king jumped up and he yelled, "Guards! Grab that man! Throw him into the boiling oil!" The guards ran up. They grabbed that beggar. They dragged him back to the cook's kitchen where his big pot of boiling oil was sitting there. And all the time, I was still a flea, remember? I'm still grabbing on to the beggar's body, trying to look for a way out. But there isn't a way out. I'm going to die with the beggar. The guards ran up to the pot of boiling oil, threw the beggar in, and slammed the lid shut on top of it. Excuse me a minute, somebody's calling me. Nobody I want to talk to. Okay, so. And the people waited around the pot of boiling oil to listen to the beggar's screams. But nothing happened. They didn't hear him yelling. Getting thrown into a pot of boiling oil would really, 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 really hurt. But they didn't hear any yelling. After a few minutes, they came over and they picked up the lid and looked in the pot. Guess what they saw? Guess what they saw? You give up? The beggar was there taking a bath in this boiling oil. Here, just rubbing his arms, rubbing his chest, rubbing his hair like he was just regular bath water. And he looked at everybody, waved, held his nose, and went under the oil. And everyone came up and looked in. He was gone. The beggar was gone. Like he had never existed. But where was I? I had been a flea, remember? I'd been thrown into the pot too. The beggar was gone. Where was I? I wasn't anywhere. Now I didn't even have a body. The beggar had lived, but I had died. I was a ghost, or a spirit, or whatever you wanted to call me. I had no body, and I started to float away into the darkness, fading, 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 fading. Hey! Hey, wake up! Wake up, you! What? I looked around. I wasn't a flea. I wasn't a ghost. I wasn't a rabbit. I was myself. My clothes were here. The chair was here. I was back in the Royal Gardens. I was alive. I was alive. I was myself again. I just dreamed it. Had I dreamed it? Or had something else happened? Did all of that really happen? Was the beggar there? Did all of that stuff really happen? Who cares? I was alive. I was myself. Hey, I said get up. The king is waiting for you. Oh, yeah, right. I'm about to die. For real this time. The guard who had come and woken me up dragged me out of the chair and he hurried me down into the king's throne room where the king was waiting there for me. And he said, well, storyteller, this is your last day. Do you have a story for me? Or do I turn you over to the cook? And I looked at the king. I looked at the people who were standing around. I looked at the queen. I looked at the prince. I looked back at the king. And I said, no, Your Majesty, I have no story for you today. Everyone went, the king leaned forward, very stern expression on his face. And he opened his mouth to speak. But before he did, I said, and I would like to tell you, Your Majesty, why I have no story for you today. I have no story because, well, when I woke up this morning, feeling wonderful, I realized I had no story. And so I went out of the garden to think, and while I was there, and I told him the story of what had happened to me that day, about Fiona, about the beggar, about the cook and the prince. I told the whole story. And when I was done, I said, "And that, Your Majesty, is why I have no story for you today." It was dead quiet in the throne room. You could hear people breathing. And I looked at the king to see what he thought. And he started to cry. He started to cry. And he said, "That's the most beautiful story I've ever heard." Got out of that one, didn't I? Once the king had stopped crying and gotten himself back under control, he gave me my freedom. My gold, and as many presents as Fiona and I could carry. We used them to get a house, where we lived happily together for many years. The king, he had my story, the story I just told him, written down on plates of gold. And every night he has that story read to him before he goes to bed. He refuses to hear any other. I never saw my friend the beggar again. I wonder what happened to him. I still look for him. I go out and I look for him because I want to know. Was that really him? Did he help me in my hour of need? Did I just dream the whole thing? I'll never know. Not until I find him, but I still look for him. If you ever see a beggar on the side of the road, stop and do him some kindness, won't you? Because maybe he will be my friend the beggar. And even if you don't, everybody knows that beggars aren't always what they seem.